Prohibited relationships inside prisons are more common than you might think. Between cold walls and guarded corridors, some agents cross the line, believing they can hide their secrets. But inside a prison, nothing goes unnoticed. A simple slip-up can turn into a scandal, and the price to pay is high. Suspicious favors, clandestine meetings, manipulation, and blackmail. When the truth comes out, there is no going back. This is the story of a police officer who lost everything. When her secret was exposed, her career ended, her name made headlines, and the worst happened. Now, she was behind the same bars she once patrolled. Sit back, put on your headphones and get ready for this story. The sound of the iron gates closing echoed through the damp corridors of the house. Rikers Island Prison. The environment was a labyrinth of concrete and metal, overcrowded with inmates who lived under a system where the rules were not only dictated by the guards, but also by those who knew how to manipulate power inside the cells. The policewoman Sarah Collins, 32 years old, knew this reality well. Working in a prison like that for 5 years meant quickly learning who was really in charge there. The guards? Not always. The real control was in the factions, in the influential prisoners, in those who knew how to use fear and influence as weapons. From the beginning of her career, Sarah prided herself on maintaining her composure, on not falling for the prison's dirty games. She saw other colleagues get lost in the toxic routine of Rikers, accepting bribes, facilitating smuggling or, in worse cases, engaging with prisoners recklessly. For her, the line between order and chaos inside a penitentiary was thin, and any slip could be fatal. But the truth is that no one left unscathed after years of working in a place like that. Rikers' hallways had a characteristic smell. The mold permeated the walls, the sweat of the inmates mixed with the strong odor of cheap disinfectant used to cover the smell of dried blood. The atmosphere was always tense. The number of prisoners was much larger than allowed, making the prison a pressure cooker ready to explode at any moment. Guards needed to be rigid and calculating, always attentive to every movement. Sarah knew that any display of weakness could be used against her. It was in this environment that Dante Morales appeared. Dante was not like the other inmates. He didn't make scandals, he didn't shout at the guards, he didn't get directly involved in trouble. He was observant. He knew exactly when to speak, how to speak and who to speak to. At 29 years old, convicted of violent crimes linked to a dangerous faction, he already had enough experience to understand the system. Dante didn't try to be violent to get what he wanted. His game was different. He seduced danger, controlled the people around him with calculated words, gestures and smiles. He knew when to be charismatic, when to appear harmless and when to command respect. He was the kind of man who made people let their guard down without them even realizing it. Sarah hadn't realized when she started interacting with him differently than the other inmates. At first, it was just casual conversations. A comment about the horrible prison food, an exchange about how the yard was busier than usual. Small details that seemed harmless, but Dante knew exactly how to turn it into something bigger. He waited. He studied. He built the approach. The days turned into weeks. Sarah found herself starting to make small concessions. Minimal, almost imperceptible things. Extra time on the patio because Dante asked for it with a discreet look. A meal better left aside, because she knew he didn't eat well. A quick conversation that lasted a little longer than necessary. The problem is that inside Rikers, nothing goes unnoticed. The inmates saw everything. They noticed the looks, the gestures, the favors. They smelled weakness, error, vulnerability. And before Sarah knew it, his name was already being whispered in the prison corridors. Other guards also started to notice. Small comments began to emerge behind the scenes. Sarah is getting too close to one of the inmates. Doesn't she realize he's playing games with her? I've seen this happen before, and the end is never good. But Sarah ignored it. She told herself she was in control. She told herself they were just conversations. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. But the truth is that, inside a place like Rikers Island, when your name starts to be spoken, it's because something has already gotten out of control. And a secret like that would never stay hidden for long. The early morning silence already Rikers Island prison. It was different from anywhere else. It was not a silence of peace, but of imminent danger. The kind of silence that came before the chaos. Sarah Collins was already used to this environment. Or at least he thought he was. Until Dante Morales gets in his way. Her first mistake was feeling like you had control over the situation. The second failure was believe that I could continue the game without being noticed. The night seemed longer now. She passed by the corridor where Dante was trapped and felt his gaze fixed on her. He didn't say anything, but I didn't need it either. The look in his eyes was a constant reminder that he knew what he was doing. He had already won before she even realized he was playing. Sarah tried to convince herself that she was still a professional police officer, that nothing she did was wrong. But the signs were there, and she began to consciously ignore them. She started to walk more slowly when she made her rounds near Dante's cell. She began to wait for him to say something. And he waited for the right moment. He never forced anything. He never rushed. Just created the perfect environment so that she herself would cross the line. At first, it was just trivial conversations. Small comments about the day. Quick observations that Sarah made, feeling that someone inside really saw her. The guards were cold, the prisoners were hostile. But Dante? Dante made it seem like she mattered. The game continued to progress without her noticing. One day, as he was walking down the hall, he said something different. "Today you look tired." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't direct flirting. It was something much more subtle. He showed that he noticed the details. Sarah, he didn't respond, but hesitated for a second before continuing on his way. And Dante noticed. In prison, a second of hesitation worth more than any word. Over the next week, Sarah began making decisions that I wouldn't take it before. Small concessions. An extra minute in the sun. A deliberate delay in locking the cells. A quick look at it lasted a little longer than it should. The inmates began to notice. Her name began circulating in the corridors. And then came the testies. First, one of the inmates commented with a crooked smile. "Guard Collins likes Morales, huh?" It was a comment disguised as a joke. But inside, nothing was a joke. Sarah ignored it. He continued walking. But it had already been marked. Rumors spread. She noticed that the eyes on her began to change. Before, it was respect. Now, it was interest. A few weeks later, blackmail came. During a nighttime inspection, Sarah was approached by Carlos Herrera, one of the inmates who led one of the factions inside Rikers. He was discreet, intelligent, and knew exactly how to approach prey that was already at a disadvantage. "Guard Collins," he said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "I know about you and Morales." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but maintained her posture. "I don't know what you're talking about." Herrera reviewed a leave. "Yes, you know. And I also know that if management finds out, you lose everything." Silence. He waited, gauging her reaction. Sarah didn't respond, but his body had already told him everything Herrera needed to know. "Don't worry. I am not your enemy. I just want a fair exchange." Sarah knew what that meant. If it didn't help, he would talk. She left there feeling tight in her chest. Now, she wasn't just involved with an inmate. I was being manipulated by others. And the worst? Dante Morales knew. At the end of that night, when she walked down the hall, he smiled for the first time. Just a discreet smile. Almost imperceptible. But Sarah got the message. I knew she was cornered. And in a prison like Rikers Island, once you become a target, there is no escape. The noise of the security radio echoed through the halls of Rikers Island. Sarah felt cold sweat running down the back of her neck as she walked through the prison yard, where the prisoners were bustling. She knew something was about to happen. The climate had changed. The looks on her were no longer the same. Before, it was just distrust and gossip. Now, it was something worse. They knew. Sarah tried to act naturally. He pretended he was in control. But every step he took, every face he crossed, made it clear that there was no longer any escape. The secret she tried to hide was spreading faster than it could contain. She had crossed an invisible line and was now surrounded. The blackmail began to intensify. Carlos Herrera, the leader of the faction that threatened her earlier, increased his demands. Now, he wanted more than just small favors. He wanted access to guard movements, inspection schedules and, even worse, help to smuggle cell phones and drugs into the prison. Sarah felt her despair growing every day. If I didn't do what they demanded, the rumors would turn into concrete accusations. If you gave in, I would lose everything. But what she didn't know was that her time was already up. That morning, the prison director organized a secretive internal operation. The administration had been receiving anonymous information that one of the guards was compromised. They didn't know exactly who it was. But they were about to find out. Sarah continued her routine normally. But something felt wrong. The inmates were restless. The guards' behavior was strange. She felt a shiver when she realized that her own colleagues were observing her differently. It was then that he saw Dante Morales in the courtyard. He wasn't nervous. It wasn't agitated. He was just smiling. A discreet, victorious smile. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. It was at that moment that I knew. Dante had delivered. Hours later, the truth exploded. Management reviewed security recordings and found compromising evidence. Sarah was caught going alone into areas where she shouldn't be. At suspicious times, always with Dante Morales present. The report was straightforward: improper conduct, favoring a criminal and unethical behavior. She was removed immediately. Your career, it was destroyed. What came next was a nightmare. The press heard about the case. Her name was in all the newspapers. Sensational headlines described her as the cop who slept with a criminal in one of the most violent prisons in the United States. Sarah denied everything at first. He tried to claim it was a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her colleagues abandoned her. Nobody wanted to be associated with her. The prison system discarded her as if she had never existed. The trial was quick. The sentence was even more cruel. Sarah was sentenced to 3 years in prison. And the worst? It would be fulfilled on Rikers Island. The same prison where before he had authority, now he was his own hell. When she arrived at the yard for the first time as a prisoner, all the familiar faces were there. The prisoners who once feared her now laughing at his fall. Dante Morales was there too. The man who destroyed her. He didn't need to say anything. Just smiled. Sarah closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. In prison, those who are weak do not survive for long.